Questions about Meghan Markle's official age, long considered a settled fact, have resurfaced with renewed intensity following the unexpected emergence of an old group photo taken during her university years. In that image, reportedly captured in the early 2000 seconds at a salsa club affiliated with Northwestern University, Markle appears among a group of smiling students. At first glance, nothing seems out of place, but as multiple analysts pointed out, most of the people in the photo were born in the early 1970 seconds. Today, they are in their early 50s. If Meghan was truly born in 1981, as her public records insist, she should have stood out as one of the youngest in that crowd. But she didn't. She blended in. That detail alone might have passed unnoticed until an American broadcast segment, led by journalist Megyn Kelly, gave the story new oxygen. Kelly posed a blunt question. Is Meghan Markle really 44 or older? She framed it not as a case of miscalculation but as potential manipulation. This isn't bad math, she said. It's bad fiction. The comments sparked immediate online discussion. But this time, it wasn't confined to tabloid headlines or gossip forums. Royal historians, genealogists, and former institution staff began raising flags about inconsistencies they had once brushed aside. In the world of monarchy where timelines, documentation, and heritage are binding, an inconsistency in age isn't just a minor detail. It could mark the unraveling of a public persona built on credibility, relatability, and carefully calibrated progressivism. That's what makes this controversy different. This is not a Hollywood question. This is a constitutional one. Across various social platforms, users began compiling images, videos, and historical class records. A Reddit thread with over 20,000 upvotes dissected Markle's early graduation data, while an independent blog known for archiving royal history uploaded scanned yearbooks claiming that Meghan's name had once appeared among listings tied to the class of 1993 8 years earlier than expected. The implications were difficult to ignore. At the heart of the dispute is the timeline of Meghan's education. According to her public biography, she graduated from high school in 1999 and went on to Northwestern shortly thereafter. But multiple unofficial alumni rosters began circulating online, some suggesting she had graduated earlier than expected. One claimed she was part of the 1993 cohort, another grouped her with 1995 alumni. Still, none of these documents bore institutional stamps. That's where the photo returned to the forefront. Because this image, simple as it was, showed Meghan's age not as a number but as a vibe, a presence. If she truly was younger than the others, why did no one appear to treat her that way? Why did she fit in so seamlessly with individuals 5 to 8 years older than her? Soon, speculation became a pattern. Critics compiled a list of quotes, interviews, and published biographies. They found instances in which Markle spoke about events in her life that didn't seem to align with her age. For example, a comment about watching certain television shows as a teenager that had gone off air before she should have been old enough to remember them. Individually, these were brush-off details, but stitched together, they formed a thread, one that led to further scrutiny. Her half-sister, Samantha Markle, gave an interview that resurfaced after the Kelly segment aired. In it, Samantha referred to Meghan as a bully brat who had, in her words, rewritten every detail about herself to fit her new reality. She claimed to have receipts that proved Meghan had misrepresented her age for years. At the time, the public dismissed the claims as bitter family rhetoric. But after the salsa club photo, Samantha's words were revisited with a new lens. Still, the story might have lost momentum until an entirely different document was brought into question, the birth certificate of Archie Harrison Mountbatten, Windsor, Meghan and Harry's first child. Originally filed in 2019, Archie's certificate listed his mother as Rachel Meghan Markle. That was expected, but several weeks later, the record was quietly amended. Her name was removed. The new version listed only her royal title, Her Royal Highness the Duchess of Sussex. There. This change sparked confusion and outrage. Legal experts questioned the modification, especially since UK birth certificates are considered public records and not typically altered except under exceptional circumstances. Meghan's spokesperson insisted that the change was made at the behest of the palace to align with royal protocol, but a palace source pushed back, denying that such a request had ever been made. The contradiction sent royal commentators into a frenzy. Why would Meghan's legal name be stripped from such a personal, binding document? And more importantly, who had the authority to authorize such a change? Critics saw this not as an isolated event, but part of a broader pattern, a systematic effort to reshape narrative details for convenience. A name on a birth certificate, a graduation date, a public age, all seemingly minor edits until they're not. As conversations intensified, royal analysts began comparing Meghan's record to other women in the royal household. Princess Catherine's timeline is precise. Her schooling, degrees, public milestones all verify through consistent documentation. The same is true for Princess Anne, whose legacy is steeped in protocol and record-keeping. Even Queen Camilla, once regarded as a controversial figure, has maintained a steady public timeline. In contrast, Meghan's narrative appears flexible. That comparison has only heightened scrutiny. Because in the royal family, flexibility is rarely a virtue. Records are sacred. Public trust is built on transparency, and a title does not exempt one from scrutiny, it invites it. As the week drew on, calls for clarification grew louder. And while the palace has made no formal statement, insiders confirmed that the topic had been raised in private discussions. The monarchy, now led by King Charles III, faces a new question: how to manage a controversy centered not on behavior but on biography. And at the heart of it, a photo from decades ago, a smile, a dance, a silent contradiction. Following the emergence of the now infamous Salsa Club photo, scrutiny turned sharply toward Meghan Markle's educational records, residency timelines, and legal documents, the foundational pillars of any public biography. What began as visual speculation evolved into an archival deep dive. Independent researchers, including royal document analysts and online transparency advocates, began comparing school attendance dates across official alumni registries. One such registry, from Immaculate Heart High School in Los Angeles, appeared to show Markle listed among the class of 1,995. That conflicts with her public timeline, which claims she graduated in 1999. The discrepancy raised a critical question. Was this simply a clerical error, or had the data been quietly altered? Adding to the confusion, yearbook scans and early graduation lists surfaced on various archival websites. Some showed a Rachel Markle in photographs dated as far back as 1993, positioning her among students who would now be approaching their mid-50s. While no document carried a government seal, the number of aligned inconsistencies was growing. Compounding the issue, Meghan's professional biography had gone through subtle revisions over the years. In earlier interviews, she referenced watching specific television shows in her pre-teen years programs that had concluded their original run well before someone born in 1981 would be of viewing age. Critics seized on those anecdotes, citing them as slips in the carefully curated timeline. Yet, what elevated the matter from anomaly to controversy was the palace's own silence. In previous royal matters, from Princess Diana's ancestry to the Queen's wartime role, Buckingham Palace has historically moved to clarify timelines. But in Meghan's case, the institution remained unmoved. That absence of correction, some argued, lent credence to the suspicion. Others claimed it was an act of institutional protection. Then came the case of Archie's birth certificate. Public access records in the UK confirmed that Meghan's name had initially appeared on the document, as expected. But shortly after, her given name was removed, replaced entirely by her royal title. The change was not announced. It was discovered by watchdog journalists. The amendment shocked royal legal experts, many of whom confirmed that altering a birth certificate without a legal name change or judicial order was extremely rare. Meghan's spokesperson issued a statement blaming the palace, stating it was an administrative formality to match royal style guides. However, a palace official refuted the claim, asserting that no such directive had been issued. This clash between narratives left a gap in public understanding. If neither party claimed responsibility, who made the change? And why? Former royal archivists weighed in. One called the modification unprecedented in modern royal history. Another said it reflected a pattern of retroactive correction seen in other areas of Meghan's public timeline. In isolation, the amendment might have been written off as administrative clumsiness. But when combined with earlier inconsistencies in graduation records, interviews, and public registries, a pattern emerged. A pattern not of missteps, but of narrative reconstruction. Still, supporters of the Duchess defended her. They argued that the obsession with her personal details reflected a double standard. No one dissected Kate Middleton's childhood with this kind of ferocity, said one commentator on BBC Radio. This is not about record-keeping, it's about resentment. But even among defenders, concern grew over the lack of transparency. Royal commentator Sarah Hughes remarked, "This isn't just about Meghan. It's about whether the institution has allowed a misrepresentation to persist. And if so, why?" More documents came under the microscope. One user on an archival site pointed to a 2001 university housing roster that listed a R. Markle as a senior resident assistant, a position typically reserved for students in their early 20s. If Meghan was born in 1981, she would have been just 19 or 20 at the time. Not impossible, but statistically uncommon. Other documents, such as voter registration forms and early television credits, showed inconsistent age references. Some pegged her as being in her late 20s during the filming of Suits, despite the timeline suggesting she should have been in her early 30s. The narrative began to shift from curiosity to institutional accountability. If the palace was unaware, how was such a vetting lapse possible? If the palace was aware, why permit it? Was the relationship between monarchy and modern media so delicate that basic facts had been overlooked in favor of narrative appeal? And more critically, did any of this matter? To those within the monarchy, it did. Royal roles come with taxpayer-funded support, diplomatic influence, and national representation. Age, background, and credibility aren't mere biographical details. They are elements of national trust. A fabricated date of birth, if proven, could challenge the legitimacy of public-facing work, charity engagements, and even legal documents signed under royal title. At this stage, no definitive proof had emerged to confirm that Meghan Markle was born in a year other than 1981. But the lack of cohesive evidence to support the official version was enough to provoke further investigation. Media outlets began requesting official records from California, where Meghan was reportedly born. So far, none have responded with full verification. The unanswered requests only fueled the storm. And behind closed doors, royal advisors were said to be quietly urging the palace to conduct its own review of records not as a punitive measure, but as a necessity for institutional integrity. Meanwhile, public opinion remained divided. But one sentiment was increasingly clear. The questions were not going away. And as history has shown, unanswered questions within royal walls tend to grow louder with time. As public interest in the age controversy deepened, pressure began to mount within the very institutions that once heralded Meghan Markle's entry into the royal family as a modernizing force. With questions now swirling not only around her biography but also around the Crown's due diligence, Buckingham Palace found itself in a precarious position: remain silent and appear complicit, or respond and risk further destabilization. Behind closed doors, aides and senior advisors reportedly convened to assess the implications of the timeline discrepancies. According to royal insiders speaking anonymously to British outlets, the issue was considered more than just a public relations concern. One official was quoted saying, "This is about credibility. If we misrepresent fact, we undermine everything else we claim to stand for." The monarchy's traditional approach has long been one of dignified silence, but that strategy began to show cracks. Leaks to the press indicated that internal reviews of archived documents, press releases, and ceremonial records involving Meghan had begun quietly, not to verify or dispute her birth year outright, but to ensure that the institution itself was not carrying inaccuracies that could compromise its own legitimacy. Palace communications have always been tightly controlled. Every announcement, every speech, every engagement vetted and reviewed. So how did such a basic biographical detail escape scrutiny? Some former aides suggested that the accelerated timeline of Prince Harry and Meghan's courtship may have contributed. Their relationship moved quickly. Within 2 years, they were engaged, married, and parents-to-be. Things moved fast, and the palace was under pressure to appear inclusive, modern, and in touch with a changing Britain, said one former royal press officer. No one was looking to complicate that narrative. That desire to modernize may have created blind spots. Even as the press continued to probe inconsistencies, public defenders of Meghan intensified their support. American outlets framed the scrutiny as a racial and cultural double standard. Royal correspondents in the UK, however, pointed to precedent. In 1936, King Edward VIII abdicated the throne not simply for love, but because the royal household feared the consequences of unvetted personal entanglements. Accuracy and lineage were not abstract concerns. They were the bedrock of continuity. As comparisons circulated, some began examining Meghan's citizenship path. Born in the United States, she would have required extensive vetting to become a working royal. Immigration and background checks, typically standard in such international unions, were presumed to have been conducted. Yet none of these details have been made public. The opacity fueled suspicion. What concerned royal historians more was the precedent this could set. If one member of the royal family could present a narrative that evades formal scrutiny, what does that say about the institution's standards? As one academic put it, a monarchy that fails to enforce its own vetting processes invites long-term reputational damage. Meanwhile, Meghan continued to appear at public events, host podcasts, and give speeches invoking transparency, truth, and self-empowerment. Her critics called it ironic. Her supporters called it strength. One particular moment caught media attention during a UN Women panel in New York. When asked about the importance of owning one's story, Meghan replied, "When the world tries to write your life for you, you reclaim the pen." The quote went viral, but in context, it stirred debate. Was she referring to media intrusion or to the growing timeline controversy? The ambiguity left room for interpretation and speculation. In response, tabloids published side-by-side images comparing Meghan's current appearance with photos from decades prior, pointing out what they claimed were age-incongruent visuals. Plastic surgeons were invited onto television panels to guess her real age, but these tactics, largely considered distasteful, distracted from the core issue, documentation. The more serious voices remained focused. A coalition of royal historians published an open letter calling on the palace to release verifiable biographical data for all working royals. "We are not demanding invasive scrutiny," the letter read. "We are asking for consistency. The public has a right to know that their ceremonial figures are accurately presented." That appeal placed the palace in a difficult bind. Release too much, and they risk appearing reactionary or admitting oversight. Release nothing, and they validate the perception of concealment. Former legal counsel to the Crown, speaking to The Times, noted that there is no legal requirement for the royal family to release personal records. But he added, "There is a moral imperative tied to public trust. The Crown depends on it." Within this environment, conversations turned to broader implications. If Meghan's age was misrepresented, what impact might that have on public records, charity contracts, or even the legitimacy of her patronages? Age, after all, influences eligibility, perception, and public accountability. Several charities, especially those focused on youth empowerment, were reported to have quietly inquired about Meghan's official age. No public statements were made, but insiders confirmed that some organizations felt uneasy about the swirling questions. Meanwhile, political figures began weighing in. A member of Parliament submitted a formal question regarding the oversight process for integrating foreign nationals into senior ceremonial roles. Though not mentioning Meghan by name, the context was unmistakable. The Crown remained silent for the moment, but historians noted that institutional silence has a shelf life. As with all royal controversies, from the abdication crisis to the Diana interviews, truth has a way of resurfacing, often at a time and place beyond the institution's control. With each passing week, the age dispute shifted from a matter of personal biography to a symbol of something larger: the tension between modern image-making and ancient expectations. And at the heart of it, the question persisted not just about one woman's birth year, but about how an entire institution protects or permits the bending of fact. As institutional questions deepened and private inquiries grew louder, the controversy surrounding Meghan Markle's age evolved from palace whispers to a matter of global debate. What had begun as an online thread, punctuated by a salsa club photo and conflicting graduation records, was now a subject of open discussion on international platforms. Media outlets in the United States, Australia, and parts of Europe began publishing timelines highlighting the inconsistencies. Major US networks ran primetime specials examining the trajectory of Meghan's public narrative. The tone was no longer accusatory, but inquisitive. People wanted answers, or at the very least, clarity. Public trust in the monarchy had already been tested in recent years. Between Prince Andrew's legal scandals and the highly publicized departure of Harry and Meghan from royal duties, the Crown's moral authority had taken repeated hits. Now, even among moderate supporters, the age dispute added to a growing list of credibility concerns. The most potent shift, however, occurred not in print or in press rooms, but in community forums and grassroots discussions. Royal-themed podcasts, Reddit threads, and online town halls began to feature historians, legal analysts, and archivists dissecting the known data. One viral clip came from a former university registrar who explained the mechanics of school rosters. She confirmed that being listed as part of a graduating class requires both a legal name and age-based eligibility. Her review of alleged archival documents involving Meghan raised what she called significant statistical anomalies. Meanwhile, data analysis from social media researchers showed that the controversy had already reached over 100 million impressions across platforms. And within that digital spread came a shift in sentiment. Initially, critics were dismissed as conspiracy theorists. But as more academics and credible figures engaged the topic, the conversation changed tone. It was no longer "did Meghan lie?" but rather, "why hasn't anyone clarified the truth?" Journalists began reaching out to Meghan's former classmates. A few gave anonymous statements. One described her as always mature for her age and noted that she had leadership roles typically reserved for older students. Another claimed that during freshman orientation at Northwestern, Meghan introduced herself as being in her mid-20s, a detail that, if accurate, would conflict with her declared age at the time. No on-the-record confirmations were obtained, but the accumulation of subtle testimonies added layers to an already dense narrative. Elsewhere, media law experts raised ethical dilemmas. Was it appropriate to question the personal data of a public figure? Did royal status strip someone of the right to personal privacy? Or was Meghan's role as a duchess, speaker, and charity leader inherently bound to public accountability? One BBC panel discussion posed a difficult scenario. If it were revealed that Meghan had in fact misrepresented her age, would that justify retrospective revocation of titles, patronages, or public contracts? The panel remained divided, but the mere asking of the question revealed how far the discourse had moved. Amid this, the Duchess of Sussex maintained her public calendar. She continued to attend charity events, produce podcast episodes, and speak at global conferences. Her messaging remained consistent: empowerment, authenticity, and truth-telling. But the gap between message and media perception widened. At a women's leadership summit in San Diego, Meghan delivered a keynote about the courage to tell your story truthfully, even when it's inconvenient. The applause was warm, but outside the auditorium, reporters asked pointed questions that went unanswered. For many viewers, the optics became jarring. How could one champion truth while remaining silent on the most basic detail of self? The contradiction was not lost on commentators. In response, Markle's defenders argued that age-related scrutiny disproportionately targets women, especially those in the public eye. They framed the controversy as an extension of systemic bias, not institutional concern. But counter-arguments pointed to Princess Anne, Camilla, and Catherine, each of whom had endured public vetting without altering core identity markers. More than that, critics said, this wasn't about beauty standards or public aging, it was about narrative integrity, and the stakes weren't just reputational. As the topic intensified, questions began to spill over into political spaces. Parliament members on the Culture, Media and Sport Committee were rumoured to be drafting a policy on transparency expectations for individuals holding publicly funded ceremonial roles. No legislation had yet been proposed, but the conversations marked a significant escalation. Legal experts also weighed in. Some noted that if Meghan had signed contracts, appearances, or book deals under an age misstatement, there could be tax and liability implications. Others cautioned that unless clear fraud was proven, such speculation would remain symbolic. And yet, symbolism mattered. Symbolism was the currency of monarchy. In that context, what began as a photo from a salsa club had morphed into a cultural moment, a reflection of how trust is built and eroded in modern institutions. Was the public willing to overlook details in favor of the broader story? Or was this the moment when narrative management met its limit? Within Kensington and Buckingham Palace, insiders reported growing divisions. One camp believed silence was the only way to protect the institution from long-term damage. Another urged a limited disclosure, perhaps a formal statement reaffirming the Duchess's public timeline, backed by documentation. But such a move risked inviting even deeper scrutiny. Once one element is clarified, others might follow. Hairline cracks often lead to structural assessments. And so, the standoff continued. The story now existed in layers: a biographical question, an institutional risk, a media event, a cultural flashpoint, and perhaps most notably, a case study in how modern royal identities are shaped, tested, and preserved in an age where digital permanence makes history harder to rewrite. By the end of the fourth week since the story broke, polling conducted by Ipsos showed that over 62% of Britons were aware of the controversy. Of that group, 44% believed the palace should issue a clarification. Meanwhile, in the United States, a Pew Research poll revealed that trust in Meghan and Harry had declined by 8 percentage points among key demographics. Still, no statement was issued, no correction offered, and the palace press office, when asked directly, gave the same reply it had maintained for weeks: no comment. The silence, once a tool of dignity, had become a vacuum. And as any observer of royal history knows, vacuums never last long. As the controversy approached its fifth week without official comment, the tone surrounding Meghan Markle's age dispute began to shift. What had once been a potential scandal now became a case study in narrative control, institutional inertia, and the modern tension between privacy and public image. Despite mounting calls for clarification, Buckingham Palace maintained its refusal to comment. That silence, long seen as a hallmark of regal restraint, began to read more like hesitation. Even senior royal commentators, usually defenders of palace decorum, publicly questioned whether this issue could be left unanswered indefinitely. Meanwhile, Meghan herself remained active, delivering carefully worded speeches, attending public events, and presenting the same poised exterior that has long defined her public persona. But her refusal to directly address the timeline questions added a quiet strain to each appearance. Analysts agree. The longer the silence, the more symbolic the story becomes. Whether or not her age was misrepresented is no longer the only question. Now, the focus has expanded to what institutions do when faced with a challenge to their own myth-making. For the monarchy, the cost of inaction is not just reputational, but generational. Younger audiences raised in an age of transparency, documentation, and real-time verification have grown less tolerant of selective truth. Legacy institutions are now expected to meet digital-era expectations of openness. In that climate, even if Meghan's age is eventually confirmed as accurate, the damage may already be done, not by the data itself, but by the reluctance to affirm it. The Crown has endured greater storms, but each controversy leaves behind residue layers of doubt that accumulate across reigns. This episode may not fracture the institution, but it has added another hairline crack. Royal watchers note the contrast with earlier decades. In the past, documents spoke for themselves. Today, silence demands interpretation. And in a world hungry for authenticity, interpretation often becomes belief. As the public awaits resolution, or at the very least, acknowledgement, the story becomes less about one woman's biography and more about how much control any public figure, even a duchess, can exert over truth in the digital age. In the end, perhaps the most revealing detail is not found in a birth certificate, a photo, or a yearbook, but in what was not said, when it mattered most.